This is my quick review of a recent knife purchase, the Sogzilla. This is the small version with approximately a 3-inch blade. Actually, it's a little more, about 3 1/8. Wanted to go over some of the good things and bad things with this knife, just for anybody that's thinking about getting one so they know what they're looking at. So anyhow, this is the Sogzilla. Again, this is a small one, and it has Zytel scales, and inside it has skeletonized stainless steel liners, which is quite nice actually. I like that feature. When I start talking about the Bob Dozier K-bar knife, that's one thing that knife is lacking that I really would have liked. But anyhow, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. So here it is, and right off the bat, I'm going to tell you this thing looks like a rip-off of a Spyderco knife. There is no doubt about it. People can say whatever they want, but it is what it is. The fact remains, however, that they have some pretty interesting features that make it a good knife in its own right. So I'm going to go ahead and open it here. And there's our blade shape. And needless to say, I've had to sharpen it at this point. This has been a user. Another thing I did was I went ahead and opened up the hole a little bit more. They do have a wave feature built into this knife, but right out of the box, the gap here is a little smaller than it needs to be. So I went ahead and opened that up, and it works really well when it comes to waving it. So anyhow, moving right along, the blade steel is very similar to a 440 steel. It's the typical China stuff that you're going to see out there, but it takes a good edge and it holds it pretty well. So I really don't have any complaints there. For a $29 knife, it's pretty much typical of what you're going to find. It is a backlock design, and like I said, the blade's about 3 1/8. So for comparison purposes, let's go ahead and look at the K-bar Bob Dozier. So here's the Bob Dozier. This one has the thumb stud, although you can get it with what appears to be a spider hole. And again, very similar knives. You can see that the blade length is about the same. And if we go ahead and push the packaging out of the way here, we'll see that the overall length is about the same as well. The nice thing about the Dozier is the fact that it is a very light knife and a very inexpensive knife. This knife goes for right about 17 bucks if I remember correctly. That's about what I paid for it. It's got a very high hollow ground blade, of AUS-8 stainless steel, which is pretty good actually. No complaints with this blade whatsoever. It functions very well. A few things I didn't care for though. The pin here that secures the lock bar was a little bit loose, meaning that the lock bar was a bit loose. This gave a few different problems. Basically, I went ahead and peened over both sides of this pin, and that corrected the problem. But there are a few things that still really are a bit of a turnoff with this knife. I mean, even at its price, it just it doesn't strike me as being high quality. Now, of course, it's a $17 knife, and it really does work very well. So if you're looking for something similar to that, it may fit the bill. I was hoping the Sogzilla was going to be a step up from it, and in some ways it is. My main complaint with the Sogzilla is right out of the box, the build quality was just terrible. I mean terrible. The blade flopped all over the place. There was a lot of play both side to side and up and down in the blade. I could tighten up the pivot pin a little bit and that would help some, but at that point it got to the point where it was almost unusable. You couldn't deploy it in a realistic manner, in a speedy manner. So anyhow, long story short, I went ahead and tore this this knife apart, and that is one of the advantages of this knife over some of the other knives, including some Spydercos, which is you can dismantle this knife. It does use torque screws throughout, and as a result you can tear it down, you can clean it out, and if need be you can do some repairs to it, which is exactly what I did. The play in the blade up and down was the result of the back spring for our lock bar being a little too loose or not strong enough. And what would happen is, as you move the blade, this bar would move back and forth as well. That's what gives you the play. The other thing is it gives you a problem as far as legality is concerned. You could take this knife and just whip it and the blade would fly open, which makes it a gravity knife and is therefore illegal. So that's a concern. And it's also a concern opening up in the pocket. So when I tore this knife down, I went ahead and I stiffened up the spring a bit. And I went ahead and I just cleaned it up a little. The other thing I noticed with this knife, as opposed to a lot of the other knives out there, they typically use a nylon washer for the pivot, or they use a phosphor bronze washer. In this case, SOG is actually using a brass washer. This is the first time I've ever seen a brass washer used in a knife, and I'll be honest with you, it looked pretty crappy. When they assembled the knife, it looks like the pivot pin here was basically forced through the hole in that washer and caused the inner diameter of the hole to be bent over, and it happened on both sides. So the washer was not flat, and that was responsible for a lot of the blade play that I had. So what I did was I went ahead and I sanded the washer to where it was nice and flat, put it back in there, cleaned everything up. Again, I tightened up the spring inside there that applies pressure against the lock bar and reassembled it. And at this point, I must say, it really does feel like a much better knife than what it costs. Now, one of the things that people like to point out is pocket clips. So let's look at pocket clips right here. SOG has their own pocket clip design that they're notorious for. And what it gives you is a nice low ride knife. When you put this in your pocket, all you're going to see is the clip, because the clip actually comes up above the end of the knife. And to a certain extent, that's nice. I mean, it's nice not having people see what you're carrying. Okay, I get that. But on the other hand, when it's in your pocket that deep, trying to deploy it quickly is difficult, to say the least. The K-bar, on the other hand, it is mounted much lower, and as a result, there's something you can grab there. It is black, so it's subdued. It doesn't stand out all that much. But again, you know, there is a fair amount of knife sticking out of the pocket. So, you know, each of these have their own issues. As far as the texture of the handle material, I actually like the SOG better. I found the K-bar, don't get me wrong, in this direction is nice and grippy. However, in this direction, there's nothing to it. And let's face facts, you are going to have to do some thrust motions with cutting on occasion, and that's the direction that concerns me, because my handle might ride up on the blade. The SOG, on the other hand, all of its grip design, or grip pattern, I should say, basically keeps your hand from moving forward and back. That works really well. I was very impressed with that, to say the least. So no complaints there as far as the SOG is concerned. The other thing that the SOG has going for it is it has jimping along the back side and front side of the handle, whereas the K-bar, on the other hand, doesn't have that at all. There is no jimping whatsoever. So that again gives you a little bit better grip. I really did like that feature as well. And again, the other neat feature with the SOG is the fact that it had that wave opening in the blade. Now, this is a bit unfair. I really wish I had my other K-bar with me. K-bar offers one of these knives with the thumb hole opening, and that probably would have been more appropriate in this review. But suffice it to say, I mean, you could do the same thing with that knife. You could make a small groove, cut the groove, just like they've done here with the SOG, and have it work the exact same way. But the fact of the matter is, this SOG is a bit smoother than the K-bar could ever hope to be. And there's a very important reason behind that. The K-bar does not have any bushings whatsoever in the pivot of this blade. Now, don't get me wrong, it works well for what it is. They simply use a raised portion of the Zytel liner on the inside up against the blade. And for what it is, it actually works pretty well. I mean, it's not a bad knife. It feels fairly smooth. But phosphor bronze, or in this case, brass, which is still a new one to me, actually works a bit better. Now, another issue I ran into, the K-bar. Again, great knife for the price. Cannot complain about that really. However, it will fail a spine whack test. Now that said, how many of us go around whacking the spine of our knife blades into objects? I mean, realistically speaking, that's not what they were meant for, and as far as I'm concerned, if you get cut in the process of doing it, you probably shouldn't have been doing it. But it just kind of gives you an idea as to the difference in the lock geometry between these two knives. The way that the lock bar behind the blade is cut and the blade itself is cut is what determines how good of a lock it is. That, of course, combined with the strength of the spring that applies pressure against the lock bar. And once the spring pressure was upped on the SOG just a little bit, it is a stronger lock. The geometry of the cuts here for the locking bar are just better on the SOG than they are on the K-bar. So again, just to break it down a little bit, this is a $30 knife, this is a $17 knife, ballpark maybe 20 in this case. Both very good knives for EDC purposes. The Bob Dozier has the advantage of having the nice high hollow grind, which makes it an excellent slicing knife and is available with both a thumb stud or the thumb hole opening. The Sog, on the other hand, is only available with the thumb hole opening, and again, it is very reminiscent of a Spyderco. Like I said, it's basically a rip-off of the Spyderco. There's no getting around it, but they did a good job. I really do like the wave feature. I use it. It works very well once you open it up a little further. The blade shape is not bad. It's very good for utility. Defensively, probably not the best. My biggest concern with this knife was how thick this blade is up through here. But it cuts very well. I really can't complain about that. It just, it looks like it would be not such a great cutter. But anyhow, nice swedge along the back of the blade here. Nice jimping here if that's your thing. Ka-Bar also has some very nice jimping on the back side of their blade right here. Both companies have done a very nice job with that. Me personally, I'm not overly concerned with jimping in this area, because if you go to do a stab, which is what most people think of when they look at jimping here, if you do a stab with your thumb here, you're going to break your thumb. So relying on jimping to keep the knife from rotting back is ridiculous. Rely on the grip for that. If you have a choil, rely on that, but don't rely on your jimping back here. So anyhow, that's been a quick review, mainly of the Sogzilla, also including a little bit on the Ka-Bar Bob Dozier knife, which again, don't get me wrong, both are very nice knives. Just don't expect them to be super high quality out of the box. You can find better knives for the money, but they both function very well. They're both very light, and they fit nicely in the pocket with their narrow width. Anyhow, if you have any questions on either knife, feel free to drop me a line. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Take care.